Hey guys, before I go ahead and wrap up this course, I wanted to spend a few minutes and talk a little bit to you about image workflow. Image workflow basically refers to everything that you do with an image once you copy it from the camera onto the computer. So this would be everything from importing it from your camera to your computer. It would include things like processing it in whatever image management system you use, and then exporting it and sharing it with your friends via your website, Facebook, email, however you choose to share those. So we're going to walk through that whole process. I'm going to show you what I do, and I'm going to introduce you to some core concepts that you'll want to be aware of. Now, I'm going to be using Lightroom in this demonstration, but keep in mind that it's the concepts that matter. So I'm going to teach you some core concepts, and if you've got some other image management system, it's probably going to have a lot of the features I'm going to talk about. So you don't need to go out and invest in Lightroom in order to make this work. There are lots of options out there. And if you're in the market for purchasing some sort of image management system, I mean, Lightroom's great, but take the concepts that I talk about and explore, shop around a little bit, and see what else is offered out there in image processing systems. So with that said, now before I dive into Lightroom, I'm going to talk about just a few of the features of Lightroom. If you really want to dive deep into Lightroom, you've gone out and you've purchased it, what you can do is jump over to Google and do a quick search for Adobe TV Lightroom. Adobe TV is a website Adobe's created where they create a bunch of free video tutorials on how to use their software. So do a search for Adobe TV Lightroom. You'll find the Lightroom Adobe TV link appear there. And when you click on it, that'll take you to a list of a whole bunch of really cool tutorials on how to use Lightroom. So here I've got episodes, which shows me individual episodes they've recorded. I can go into shows here and click on any of these links. So let's click on Getting Started with Adobe Photoshop Lightroom 5. And here's a whole list of tutorials, hours of training on everything that you could possibly want to know about Lightroom. So I'll encourage you that if you've purchased Lightroom to explore this and really do a deep dive into some of the really cool features that are available. All right, so let's jump back now to Lightroom. Actually, you know what? Before we dive into Lightroom, I wanted to show you how I organize my photos outside of Lightroom to create a sort of a redundant system that allows me to search my images two ways. So I can search them through Lightroom, I can search them through a really well organized folder structure. So let's jump over to the Finder, and I want to show you how I've got those organized. I have an external hard drive that I've got right here, it's a 2 terabyte drive. I need to upgrade that though because I'm starting to fill that up. So I got a 2 terabyte drive that I keep all of my photos on. Now, I don't just keep them all on that one drive, because if that drive fails, then I would have lost years and years of work and photographs. So I always make sure that I've got a duplicate drive. So I keep another backup drive about the same size where I will copy everything from this drive onto that drive. Now, what I do is whenever I copy a photo to this drive, I make sure I copy it to the other drive. That's not the most efficient system. You can explore things like on a Mac, you've got Time Machine that will allow you to, anytime you've got the two drives plugged in, it will mirror the one drive on the other drive. So I don't have to keep track of, did I copy a photo to this drive and not this drive? That could really cause some problems down the road if I made a mistake and one drive fails and I'd forgotten to copy them over to the other. So it's something that I'm looking into right now to figure out, how to make sure that automatically mirrors the other drive. So I'm sure there's lots of other options out there, whether you're on a Mac or on a PC, but I would jump in and explore that because you want that redundancy. The last thing you want is for a drive to fail and for you to lose years and years of hard work and amazing images. So on the drive, the way that I structure it is basically in a good, clean, hierarchical structure. So I've got photos for business, photos for family, and some of my friend photos that they've shared with me. If I go into the business drive, this is where I keep all of my cave images. So I've got two folders on the business drive. I've got the Lightroom Business, which holds all of my Lightroom catalogs, where the data that I create in Lightroom is stored. So things like keywords, ratings, some metadata options, all that I enter in Lightroom is stored in this catalog. My images are all stored in the images folder. So you've got images, and then I've got different categories. So I've got caves, cities, my old film system back when I was shooting film and then digitized everything, historic sites, nature shots, people, religious sites, textures. So those are the big categories. If I go into caves, I've now got it broken down by individual caves. And if I go into any one cave, then it will show me the different dates when I shot in that cave. So if someone says, hey, you remember the photos we did on that main drain trip like in 2009? Do you have those images? I can go in and quickly find the folder, and if they want a specific image, I know where to look. The goal that I have for myself is to be able to find any image, any file on my computer within 30 seconds. If I can't do that, I need to reevaluate my system. So I've got this system here to easily and quickly find images, and then the other system I have is here in Lightroom. So again, I'm not going to go through all of the features that exist in Lightroom for organizing your shots, but I'm going to give you some ideas of some things that exist. All right, now let's really dive into Lightroom. I want to first talk about getting my images into Lightroom. So once I've gone out and I've done a shot, and actually I've got a set of images here that I just barely captured from a trip that we did last weekend. So this is going to be, I'm really going in and processing my images here. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the folder that this new folder is going to be created in. So I'll click Caves. And now I'll come to this little plus button and say add a new subfolder here. We'll call this subfolder Erebus because that's the name of the cave. So we'll hit create. There it is. Now let's check over here in the Finder. And there it is. It appeared. So Lightroom is tied to that folder structure that I've set up. Now to go through how to set that up, again, explore those Adobe TV tutorials. So once I've got my folder selected, I'm going to select that folder and I'm going to come down here to Import. So by default, it's selected the compact flash card that I've plugged into my camera. So I'll go ahead and select that. Well, I don't even have to select it. It's just pulled up the images. Lightroom automatically identifies whether or not a photo exists in the system or not. So everything is checked that hasn't yet been imported into the Lightroom catalog. So I can just leave it as is and then go ahead and copy those over. Now, when I'm copying things over, I have the option to copy as a DNG, to copy the CR2, the raw file, to move them, or to add them to the catalog. I choose to copy them as a DNG. A DNG is a digital negative file. The nice thing about the digital negative file is that if I just copy the file over, it's going to copy the camera raw file. Then it's going to create a separate XML file. Any changes that I make in Lightroom will be recorded in that XML file and not in the raw file. So if I grab the raw file and copy it over to send it to a friend and they get it and they open it in Lightroom, when they open it, all of the adjustments that I made, all of the keywords I assigned to that photo, all of that is gone. It's stored in that XML file. So there are two separate files that must be copied if I simply copy it. If I convert it, however, to a DNG file, all of that information is stored in the file, the single file. So I've got the image data and I've got all of the adjustments that I've made in Lightroom, all stored in that single file. So I copy them over as a DNG. The next thing I need to do is tell it where to store those. So to tell it where to store those files, I'll just click right here on the actual text that shows the path and say other destination. I'll navigate through that folder structure that I've created down to Erebus Cave, and we'll click Choose. The next thing that I do before I actually begin the import is I make sure that certain core metadata is assigned to each of these files. Metadata is basically important text data that I want to be embedded into that image and go with that image wherever it goes. So it would include things like my copyright notice, the date it was taken, my address, my phone number, email address, website, just so that if someone grabs my image, they know where to find me. And if somebody steals my images and uses it to, to generate some revenue, then I've got some backup to show that that indeed was my image. So I always assign a default set of metadata that I've created. So here in Lightroom, if I click here on the metadata set and I go ahead and create a new set, I can go through and enter a bunch of information that I want included in this batch of images. So for me, I always make sure that, in fact, let's go to this preset. My core data, I include a bunch of directory information so they know how to get a hold of me. All right, so once I've assigned that metadata set, I've selected the images that I want to import. I tell it where I want it to import and how I want it to import. I'll go ahead and click Import. So once your images are imported, you then begin the process of minimalizing. That's right, minimalizing. This is, of course, the minimalist cave photographer, so we need to talk about minimalizing our images. Now, what do I mean when I say minimalizing? And why does that matter? Well, a few years ago, I got a little warning that popped up on my computer that said, disk almost full. So I looked at the hard drive, I opened it up just to see how many images I had on there, and I had around 12 or 13,000 images. So I started going through those images and quickly realized that about 80% of them or more were crap. Or they were shots that, I'd kept them, they were mediocre, and I kept them just, maybe one day I might use it. Maybe there would be a need for it. But the reality is 10 years had passed, and there was never a need for it. I didn't even realize it was on there. So I began the process of going through and asking myself, do I love it? Do I need it? Do I use it? And if I couldn't answer yes to any of those questions, I deleted it. And at first there was a lot of heartburn. I was getting rid of lots of images that had some meaning to me, years ago, and that was hard. But the more I did it, the more I'd start to look at my images and see the really great shots that weren't watered down in the clutter of all of these mediocre or poor shots that I thought I might use. And that was significantly more fulfilling. So at this point now, every time that I import a set of images, I go through that process of weeding out the mediocre and junk shots and leaving only the best shots. So once I've pulled them in, the first thing that I'll look at, so let's take a look in this first batch of shots. The first thing that I'll look at is there anything that's obviously overexposed or underexposed? And I'm seeing one right now. This shot here is obviously way underexposed. There's no point in me taking up real estate on my hard drive to keep a junk shot that's completely underexposed. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on it. Go down to Remove Photos, which is slightly out of the view here. And I'm going to select the option Not to Remove because that just removes it from the catalog but keeps it on the hard drive. But I want to delete it from disk. It is going to be gone forever when I click that. That can be intimidating for some of you, but really, what are you going to do with this image? So delete it from the disk. So the next thing I'm going to do is go through and take a look and see if there are any that are out of focus. Because if it's out of focus, I can, spend a lot of time trying to sharpen it, but it's never really going to look as good as if it were in focus. So I've missed something in not getting it focused. That's not really worth it to me to keep it. So to do that, I'll just click on the image to zoom in. Let's look at the critical point of focus here. That one looks pretty good. So it may take a while for these images to load depending on your computer and the hard drive speed, the processor speed. But it's worth it to take that time and go through to see if there's anything that's out of focus and worth throwing away. Typically, I don't run into this issue when I'm underground because a lot of times I'll check and double check to make sure that my subject is in focus. But if I do find one that is not in focus, then now's a good time to get rid of it. Those all look pretty good. So once I've looked at exposure and focus And actually, you know, I need to come back here because this is obviously overexposed. The highlights are way too bright. So I'm going to get rid of these two images. So let's remove photos, delete from disk, and they're gone. Everything else looks like it's exposed properly. The next thing I need to look at now is composition. Do I really like the composition? And I can tell you from most of these shots here, when I was underground, I was shooting and tweaking and really nothing was sticking out to me. It didn't really end up looking the way that I envisioned it. So I'm going to go back now and, you know, this composition is off. Let's see, this one, I'm really not liking the division of space, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that one too. So let's remove that one. This one is, the balance is a little bit off. There's a little too much up here. This seems crooked. So it's really just not working for me. So let's delete this photo. Same thing here. Let's kind of scroll through these really quickly. See, it's looking a little bit better. These look crooked. That looks a little more straight. So these two, I'm not really caring for. Let's go ahead and remove them. That one's okay. I like the shadows, but again, the composition is just a little weird. This is too bright. The shadow, I want to see the detail there, but I'm not. So really, like, I'm thinking this one's the best, although it's really bothering me that there's not a lot of data in that shadow there. And that one seems a little crooked compared to this one, but it's offset. So overall, I'm really not a huge fan of any of these shots. But if I had to keep just two, it's probably going to be, let's see, let's compare these two here. This one versus this one. That's a little crooked. This one is actually straight, so I'm going to delete this. And then of these two, this one is obviously significantly better. So this is where, you know, there can be a lot of inner turmoil when you're looking at two shots and you're like, well, it's just slightly different than the other side. Might as well just keep the both of them. No, go for the one that you think's the best, because why keep an amazing shot and a mediocre shot? I don't see the reason why to do that. So I'm going to come back here and say, I don't love this one. I really love either of them, but this one's better than the other. So I'm going to click on this one and we're going to remove that one as well. So I just went now from about, what was that, 8 or 9 okay shots to the two that I think are the best. Now, once I've narrowed it down, so I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I'm going to spend time later going through every one of the shots I did and narrow it down to the top 1 or 2 shots, maybe 3 if there's a good reason to keep them. Once I do that, I'll go through and rate them. So of these two, which one do I really think is the best? I'm going to say, it's kind of hard to tell on this one. I really like the light and the shadows on this, but the composition, maybe not so much. This one, the composition's a little better, but I'm not liking the shadows. So it's sort of a, you know, toss-up between the two. So I'm going to say, I'm going to make the judgment and say this one. So I'm going to rate it 1 star because it's really not a spectacular image, but it's better than this one, I guess. This is all about decisions. You're going to have to make decisions. And the more you spend time up front making those decisions, the less time it's going to cost you down the road when you're sorting through a bunch of images trying to decide which one's the best. So spend the time now going through, reducing down to only your best shots. Make sure you label the ones that are the best using, you know, star ratings. So this is a 1 star. If I scroll down a little bit farther, let's take a look at some other shots really quick. So shots like this, you know, I'm probably going to give that a lot higher rating. So this one here, looking at these images, maybe a 5-star image. So I rate that one 5 after I go through this process of checking the focus, the exposure, and the composition to make sure this really is the best one out of the bunch. So after I've gone through and taken the time to weed out the crap and isolate down the best shots, now I'm going to spend some time in Lightroom making them a little bit better, making those global and local adjustments that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to click on this shot. Let's say that this is one of my top images. Then now move into the Develop module, make a few little adjustments to it. So maybe I'll bring out the shadows just a little bit. So let's lighten our shadows. Not too much because it starts looking awkward, so maybe just a little bit. Let's bring our blacks up slightly. Maybe we'll bring those highlights down a little bit because they're a little too intense, just slightly. Adjust overall exposure. Let's fine-tune those highlights again. So I'll just make some tweaks over here. Maybe I need to make a local adjustment, so I'll grab the paintbrush. And let's make our brush a little bit bigger. So there we go. We'll leave it at that for right now, but you can see I go through and I just make some fine-tuned adjustments. Now this isn't perfect. I'm going to actually spend a little bit more time working on this later, but you get the point. Isolate the images down to the very best of the best, make some fine-tuned adjustments to them to get them perfectly the way you want them. And then at that point, you're ready to share those with your friends, family, whoever you want to share those with. So now let's take a look at the process of exporting our images. So to export images, I'm going to select the images that I want to export. Now, ideally, because you've gone through and you've thrown away all of the junk, and you're only left with the best of the best, you can just select an image, hit Control or Command A to select all of them. Or you can click, if there's just a few you want to grab, just click on it, hold the Command or the Control key down, and you can select the ones that you want to export. So you go ahead and select them. Come up here to File, down to Export. And there are a few features that I want to point out here that you may want to be aware of when you're exporting. One of them, one of the biggest, the first thing is where do you want to export those to? So I'm going to just go ahead and save it on the desktop for now. Let's scroll down and look at some of the other features that we have. So once I've gone through and I've thrown out the crap, I've gotten rid of that 80% or maybe even 90%, that are mediocre to subpar images. The next step that I'm going to do is to jump over into the Develop module. So right now I'm in Library, where I do my organization and cleaning up, and I go into the Develop module to enhance those best of the best images. So I'm going to go through now each image, and those that I feel like are fine, they're great, they look marvelous, I'm going to just leave them as is. But those that I feel like need a little bit of a touch-up, I'm going to go ahead and make some adjustments at this point here in Lightroom. So let's maybe jump over to another set of images. Again, we haven't gone through and cleaned up everything. I'll do this later. But for now, let's go through the concept of how you do global and local adjustments. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but I'm going to show you here practical application in pulling in and processing images. So maybe I've decided that this is one of my best images here, one of the best of the best. I've thrown out all others in this series, and I'm down to this one. So I'm now going to go through and make some adjustments to it. So maybe I start by bumping the exposure up a little bit because it seems a little bit dark in the shadows. And maybe I just have to do that exposure in the shadows. Let's go. So let's bump the exposure. It's looking a little bit better there in the foreground. Now, where the highlights are not looking so hot. So let's adjust those highlights down a little. And maybe the whites to bring that back down. Okay, let's take a look before and after. So I'll hit reset, and then I'll hit Control Z or Command Z to undo. So I'm still losing a little bit of the detail here in the highlights, but I don't want to affect everything overall because it's looking pretty good in here. So I'm now going to make a local adjustment. We'll grab the paintbrush tool, and I'm just going to paint in this area right here. Now, because it was set with a high color temperature, it automatically applied a color temperature. I'm going to bring that warm temperature down to neutral again. And then let's now go into the highlights just in that brightly exposed area. So we'll take our highlights down a little bit more. Okay. And I'm also noticing there's a little bit of a problem here. So let's take a look at it. I'm getting some weird, magenta and greenish colors. I'm getting some weird magenta and greenish edges to this. That's an artifact of my digital sensor and the chip and the way that it records light. I can correct that in Lightroom. So I'm going to scroll down to, let's see, where is that at? Oh, here it is, lens correction. So I'm going to go into manual here, and I'm going to adjust the defringing. There's a fringe effect here. So let's first take this and we'll bump up the amount. Now notice the farther up I go that effect starts to disappear with the purple hue. I'm going to expand that out just a little bit so I can capture all of it. So we've gotten rid of that. And then this greenish color, let's get rid of that as well. So we'll bring that up and it starts to neutralize that effect. So let's zoom out. That's looking a little bit better. And then I'll go through and I might make some other adjustments, but you get the point. Once you've gone through the library module and you've organized and got rid of the junk, minimalized your shots, you now want to go into develop and make them look really great. Now, one last thing that I'll make an adjustment here on, let's add a little bit of sharpening to that. So I'll take this amount up, and I've zoomed into 100% just by clicking. So you can see if I go up here way too much, that's starting to break down and degrade the image. So you don't want to do too much sharpening, just a little bit here. You can adjust our radius and our detail. So that's looking pretty good. Once you get it to a point where you look at your shot and you say, that is fantastic, I'm done. And you've done that through all of your images, at that point, you're ready to share your photographs. So let me walk you through the process of exporting your shots so that you can share them either on Facebook or through email or on your website. So once you decide which images you want to share, you go ahead and click on those. So I'll click on this one, I'll hold the Control key down, selected this one, maybe I like this one over here. So select the ones that you want to export. Maybe and hopefully you've gone through and eliminated all the junks so that you can basically select all of them and share them. Or maybe if you have one or two, you can quickly go through and select the best of the two from each series. So it should be a fairly easy process to decide what to share. Once you've selected those, you can come over here to File, Export, and that opens the Export Settings dialog box. Now there's a couple things that I'll point out. One is select the location where you want those files to be saved. Select the file settings. Do you want to save it as a JPEG, a PSD, a TIFF, DNG? Probably a JPEG if you're going to share it with somebody else. You can adjust the color space if you want. I usually just leave that at default. Down here you can resize the image. If you're sharing this over the web or through email, you probably want to reduce the size. And you have the ability to set specific height or width or height that you want it to stick within. So it doesn't necessarily make the image 1500 by 1500 pixels, but it allows whichever is the biggest dimension not to exceed that, and the other just, falls where it falls. So you can adjust that. You can apply some sharpening after the fact for screen or for print if you're doing that. And this is where it gets really important with cave photography. If your camera has a GPS capability, when you share that image, if someone were to open that and look at the metadata, they could see the GPS location for that cave and then go visit this secret cave that you know about, and pretty soon it's all over the internet. So I find it very important to make sure that, actually I don't have a GPS, but if I did in my camera, I would check to remove the location information. Remove any person information if you want to do that. I usually uncheck that. And then include all metadata, copyright only. You can choose what you want to include and what you don't want to include. So I usually include all metadata except for location information. At that point, I go ahead and hit export. That's going to run through the process of exporting. Let's pull up our Finder window here and see what happens. So go to the desktop. And wait for those to appear. So here they are. There's the JPEG. I can go ahead and send that off now to whoever I want. Now this is a large file, 11.6 megabytes, 21.4 megabytes, and 13.4 megabytes. I didn't include or I didn't apply any compression. So if I come back here and want to reduce that, then I need to make sure that I do check the resize button, and I can resize that. Now you'll notice if I resize, I can resize by megapixels. So